Hello, welcome to Securing Distributed Healthcare Organizations webinar with VMware and Red Canary. Today, we have Adam Mathis, Director of Information Security from Red Canary, and I'm Evan Hernandez, Senior Security Technical Marketing Manager for VMware. As a reminder, today's session is being recorded. We'll follow up after the presentation via email with the recording and the additional resources. We encourage you to ask as many questions as possible. So please use the GoToWebinar chat function and we'll get to answer them at the end. Oh, I'm sorry. I'd like to, Adam, would you like to give your...
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm Adam, as Evan mentioned. I'm with Red Canary. I've been with Red Canary for probably 3.5, 4-ish years now. We monitor endpoints for customers all over the world in all kinds of different verticals, but we get to see a lot of interesting things happening in healthcare and otherwise. Before coming to Red Canary, I worked at a healthcare company for about a decade. So it's a subject that's near and dear. I know the pain and struggle from a healthcare peeps. So hopefully we can go through some cool stuff today that will be helpful and educational to everybody.
Definitely. All right, so our current agenda is to review some of the current risks in the environment and the threat landscape. Why is healthcare a target, especially today in 2020? Healthcare, some of the healthcare exploitation vectors, tactics, techniques, telehealth becoming a major security challenge, some tips on how we can make it better, and then we'll run through a small demo on some of the stuff that we can help alleviate with. And then we'll touch on Q&A if there's any. So how bad has it really gotten? Let's take a look at some of the numbers that we've been seeing in the market. Ransomware damages are up 15 times since 2015. 56% of the breaches took months or longer to discover. And then only 20% are confident that their current antivirus solution will protect their company from ransomware. Additionally, over 75% of all breaches are financially motivated. Ransomware is now estimated to be over a $5 billion crime industry. 4,000 ransomware attacks daily since January 1st of 2016. Businesses hit by ransomware every 40 seconds, which is insane. And 58% of those breach victims are categorized by small businesses. So this is why many organizations across the globe are now looking at replacing their legacy AV with some next generation endpoint security platforms like Carbon Black. On average, the attack dwell time in 2018 is 78 days, and the average cost of a data breach in 2018 is around 3.6 million. So the majority of that come from stolen credentials, which was the most common breach in 2018, and the average number of security tools in any environment was around 75.
Jeez.
Yeah, I know. Even VMware, we've definitely consolidated a lot of our tools with everything going on, right? So those numbers on the previous slide were all from before the pandemic hit. And the reality now is that the teams have even less visibility and control with more remote devices, everybody working remotely, and the perimeter being extremely distributed. At the time when our threat teams and research teams show that attacks rose as much as 148% month over month as the pandemic hit. That's crazy. So unfortunately, during these times of uncertainty and doubt, threat actors are ready to take advantage of the widespread desire to be informed. This is already happening with the coronavirus based on the original research done by our threat analysis unit, our TAL team. People and businesses who are already in the heightened state of emotion and on overload with the changes in all aspects of their lives are now at risk from bad actors in the intent of stealing that personal information, sensitive information, maybe some payment details, and more simply using luring tactics that feature the coronavirus themed malware. While some of those techniques aren't new, history has always proven that cybercrime often increases during times of heightened emotion, distraction, and stress from bad actors. religious or festive holidays, elections, especially now that's coming up on top of the coronavirus, and even Black Friday sales events. So these actors exploit challenging times to find avenues for distributing that malware. Our threat analysis unit is continuing to track this trend and has seen a correlation between significant news events related to the pandemic and an increase in the number of cyber attacks occurring on a per day basis across the globe. So the threat landscape, increased attacks on these endpoints, the need for security in the workplace has been changed by the new remote reality. I'm remote. I'm sure, Adam, you're remote, right? We're not in our offices like we're normally used to. Organizations lack the visibility into those endpoints. Without that visibility, they're completely flying blind about the attacks that threaten those endpoints. They also depend on legacy antivirus that does nothing to address preventing, detecting, or responding to ransomware and non-malware attacks. Criminals are definitely opportunists, right? So it's not surprising that malicious actors are taking advantage of this new reality. They're targeting the way employees connect to their workplaces from their homes. They're increasing their use of social engineering and phishing campaigns, denial of service attacks, and the exploitation of vulnerabilities in home routers. Attackers go to where their surface is open, right? And the money is now distributed across all of the homes that employees and employers are working from. I'll send it over to you, Adam.
Yeah, so we wanted to kind of take some time and just discuss healthcare as a vertical, as an industry. Like they have some unique problems when it comes to IT and security, but they have a lot of problems that are common across all industries. They just may feel them in different ways. And so, trying to why do actors target healthcare? Well, the reason is that the data that healthcare has is traditionally more valuable. If you think about credit cards and stuff like that, if a retailer gets compromised and they lose your credit card, you get on the phone with your credit card company, you can see the charges pretty quick, within 20-30 minutes, they can reverse all those charges, invalidate your card, and then send you a new one. If you've ever tried to change your social security number, it's a very different situation. So, when you think about what consists of a health record, it's kind of your medical history, your social security number, attributes of your life that you can't change at all, or will be incredibly difficult to change going through a lot of levels of bureaucracy. So those records that are sold they have a much longer life cycle and lifetime. So where you may get $5 a credit card on the dark web, you've got anywhere from numbers between $250 to $1,000 per healthcare record.
Wow.
So that stuff is just from a business standpoint, if you can end up with roughly the same amount of medical records as you can credit cards, you stand to make a lot more money. And people will buy that stuff to either assume your identity, ruin your credit, abuse prescriptions, all kinds of stuff. There's a lot of things people can do when they have that much of your life in their hands. So it's healthcare is the target because you have this combination of that valuable data and some historic IT problems. Healthcare has a history of getting less support for IT and security, both from a leadership buy-in perspective and from a resources perspective. And so a lot of times you end up with these organizations that are trying to do a lot with a little, but they're trying to protect this incredibly valuable data. So it's a challenge. You skip on to the next slide. So this is, some of those IT challenges we're talking about. It is getting better. Thankfully, the IT sector in general is now actually outpacing other industries for IT spend. So they're prioritizing some of this stuff. They realize they have some problems, but they're still, healthcare is they lag behind all other industries, like at a at an average level on patching vulnerabilities and all kinds of other stuff. So there's also this like resistance to change. So you're thinking about a lot of these devices that are in hospitals or in providers' offices. Most of the time they're proprietary. They're provided by a vendor. They're probably running like an ancient operating system, and the guidance is like, don't ever patch this thing, because if you do, like, you're out of support, and it's probably going to break and it could impact somebody's health. And so those things combined with this interconnected nature of the healthcare industry, where you have providers and insurers and hospitals and all of these different organizations that have to share data, and they share it in a bunch of different ways. And so you have all of these different little inroads and outroads from your organization, from your environment, that have to support these other providers and these other networked companies. So not only you have to make sure you're on point, you have to make sure that one of your providers doesn't get compromised, or that you're watching all those choke points. And that only gets more complicated when you start sending people home. So now they've got to, at a minimum, like VPN in, or use some kind of secure mechanism to get back home. And then there's more choke points you got to worry about. So what ends up happening is you end up with this sprawl of technology that isn't updated, or isn't going to be updated. Lots of pushback. So you end up with this mounting tech debt, and these systems that you might not have the expertise to maintain, and so you're fully dependent on these outside service providers, these outside software developers. And so a lot of these IT teams in healthcare are just trying to hold it together. And so when you take those two things, put them together, the valuable data and all those challenges, it's not a surprise that, like, in 2019, breaches and ransomware in healthcare accounted for like $4 billion lost. It's a very lucrative business for cybercriminals, because they can get what they want. Like, if you're a hospital, you can't say like, okay, well, we've got ransomware going on, let's just wait it out. Let's just see if we can, like, even if everything goes perfectly and they've got all the backups they need and they've got all the other controls and processes in place to restore, you're still talking about days. Right. And to evict the adversary, to start restoring from backup, hope that your backups are good and that you've tested them in some period of time. So even like in that ideal situation, you're talking about a ton of downtime. And so actors know this. They know that, like, if a hospital said like, oh, we got ransomware, but we're going to make a business decision not to pay it, like, that press is going to be terrible. So they take advantage of it. Like Evan was saying, like, they take advantage of times of emotional stress, and knowing that if they push, they're probably going to get what they want.
Yeah, even the delay, right, Adam, of shifting to a paper model at a hospital, it's a major loss.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you have to hope that your paper model is good, that it actually works, that you've tested it. But yeah, that's absolutely true. Next slide. Yeah, so these are, like I mentioned before, we monitor systems for healthcare of all sizes, small offices all the way up to hospitals, across all other kinds of industries as well. But we're kind of in an interesting position. Like, some of our customers, like, we're with them from kind of the planning preparation stages, and we can kind of see things from the beginning when something bad starts to happen. Others come to us after they've had their worst day, and so we start in the middle of the movie where things are going poorly. So, but we can kind of get some good trends together. We can kind of see how these actors are operating in healthcare, and it's not sexy. I mean, like, it's not when you think about like the big compromises, you always think like, oh man, they've got this state-sponsored actor that's using this really complex zero-day. Like, no, it's usually like an ancient Java web server running on like an ancient Solaris server sitting on the internet, and it's just compromised because there's like 1,000 CVEs for it, and it doesn't take anything super complicated. So what we typically see, like, for inroads and exploitation, is vulnerable web services, and remote administration. So sometimes like the tools that service providers will use to maintain those services for you, they're the ones who are supposed to be patching your stuff and taking care of it. If they don't patch those systems, now the adversary has administrative capabilities across all of your endpoints. So they kind of use your tooling against you. Misconfigured and poorly secured remote access. So we talked about, at a distributed workforce, people have to have a secure way to get back home. But a lot of times, especially in situations like with COVID, if you send people home quickly and you don't have like a really good remote infrastructure in place, a lot of corners get cut because, getting people back to work is the most important thing. And so, making sure that like that design and that technology goes through like a full security review and hardening, it's probably going to be put on the back burner because we got to get people back to work.
Right.
And obviously email is also another common one. Sorry, Evan, what were you gonna say?
No, I was agreeing. I mean, it's definitely a lot of vectors.
Yeah. So like the question, a lot of people, especially those who like really like to talk about attribution, it's like, who are the actors that are working in healthcare? Well, I mean, there are definitely some named actors that are specializing in healthcare. So, I've listed Deep Panda, who has been attributed to the Anthem breach years ago, and Orange Worm is one that's gotten some recent attention, kind of a smash and grab group. There's definitely actors who say they won't target healthcare if you believe them, if you trust that there's honor amongst thieves. We have seen some instances where, like, when an actor is confronted with the, hey, like, did you know this was a hospital? They're like, oops, sorry, didn't mean to, and they'll, give the key and go away. But we still see plenty of ransomware in healthcare, so there's definitely not that many people that are kind of taking that code. But because of those issues that we've been talking about with the IT struggles, the barrier for entry isn't super high. Like it's not limited to the most sophisticated actors, because a lot of ways in can be found just by kind of like scanning the internet, and you're like, oh, this server, I pulled back the banner on this server, and I can tell that there are like 40 different CVs that I could exploit here. This is going to be an easy target, and then they move in. And one of the most telling things to me about the state of especially security in healthcare is that the majority of these actors have not changed the way they do business in years. Orange Worm specifically is right, I added them, like they, first started seeing them, it's like 2015, something like that. They have not really changed the way they do business, the tools they use, or really anything outside of a couple of small changes in 5 years. And they are still just running amok in organizations. And when we see them, and we have, they're noisy. Like they do crazy amounts of noisy recon. They are like slamming all the SMB shares in the organization, trying to move laterally, and they don't care. And the reason that actors do stuff like that is because no one has raised the level of detection and prevention to force them to. I mean, hackers are just like anybody else. They're lazy at heart. Like they don't want to work hard. They just want to do the same things that work for them. And until the bar is raised across the board, they're just going to keep looking for and finding easy targets. So ransomware, obviously, like one of the big issues or big discussions in healthcare because of the implications. Some years back, there were some famous predictions of, around 2018 or 2019, we're going to see the first death related to a cyber attack. And just last week, we have this situation in Germany where a hospital was impacted by ransomware, and somebody died. And the journalist, tried to tie that together. They hedged a little bit in the actual article to say like, well, because of these factors, it could have been, but there's I included two different viewpoints here because, you know, these are two well-respected names in information security who've kind of drawn slightly different conclusions. But really, like, I'm not saying one is right and one's wrong. It's just, you know, we already live in a world where technology is so ingrained in healthcare that the loss of those services is going to impact people living and dying, and it's just going to become more and more of an inevitability. You know, in this case, the vulnerability that was exploited, you know, and there's no one to blame in the incident channel, you know, so this is not like trying to beat anybody up. The vulnerability that was exploited was like 9 months old that they got in and did this thing. And, you know, to the actors' credit, when they were confronted by a massive amount of media, they said, oops, and they gave the decryption key and they disappeared. But in the time that that hospital was down, they had to reroute some patients. Someone who was in, you know, a critical state had to be rerouted to another hospital an hour-ish away, and they didn't make it. And so it's, you know, it's a slippery slope, because the difference between, you know, extorting a business to get money out of them and like what's essentially manslaughter, it's a difference to the person who did it. Like there's definitely implications downstream. But these types of things are important to think about, like, because when you start attacking organizations who have people's lives in their hands, like, you got to understand this may be an outcome. All right, so the next slide is an example of, if, you know, for any of you out there who have been fortunate enough to never really see what ransomware looks like, here's an example that is, you know, what you're going to notice is there's a lot of things in here that are very noisy. To start off with, the first thing this actor does is drop Mimikatz without renaming it onto the C drive of this box. Like, there are no legitimate Windows files named Mimikatz. Like, it's like a super fragile but super high fidelity detection use case is a thing called Mimikatz on my system, because that is always going to be evil, or you work with trolls and they're trying to make your day go wrong. So they dropped that. They didn't even use it. They just dropped it because they might want to. They kick off some applications using PsExec. If you're not familiar with PsExec, it's an absolutely great IT tool. If you don't use it, it's almost always only used for evil, because it's a great way. If you have an administrator account on a foreign machine, you can very easily execute whatever you want on that foreign machine. So so they kick that off. That spawns PowerShell. So we see PowerShell kick off here, runs a staged PowerShell file or script, and then on the next slide we see it start to do some work. So that PowerShell script, you know, kind of compiles a binary. That binary kicks off. The first thing it does is delete shadow copies. This is another excellent detection use case. There are very few times that this happens, and you should probably know about all of them, because this is one of the more common executions that we see right before your day gets really bad. So they're trying to make sure that you don't have any backup files, that this is going to impact you and make you sad. So we've got the first file is written. It's a README with some instructions, and interestingly, they immediately encrypt it just to make sure that they can, I guess. So they encrypt the README file, and then they create the actual README file, which is giving you the instructions of like who you were going to pay and how much and all of that. And then after this, it's just a long string of file modifications where they just crawl your system, and you know, they're encrypting all of that and attaching that little, you know, that .db, that's like, you know, a unique identifier to this system. And so all the files will eventually have that, and when they're in their encrypted state. And yeah, there's not much to do. I mean, like at this point, if you jump back one, Evan, if you don't mind, if you look at the timestamps, like from the time that the thing kicks off to the time it starts encrypting, it's all automated. Like you don't have a lot of time to catch it. This is one of those things that you want to catch way earlier and have some prevention in front of. Yeah, we have a lot of really, like, we have some resources on like some really practical things to do to prevent ransomware. Prevention is definitely the one you want. Detection's great, and you have to have detection in place, but you want to prevent ransomware because you're not going to be faster than the script they've put together to do this stuff. All right. So the next one is a different type of threat. Earlier this year, we found an actor. Originally found them in a healthcare provider. Their MO is basically to come in and instead of disrupting the business by using ransomware, they mine crypto coins. And so it's always funny because like you get these different reactions with crypto mining because some people are like, yeah, whatever, that's basically just like basically adware. It's a pup. Like there's someone in your network that has administrative access, and the only thing keeping them from dropping ransomware is how they feel that day. They've chosen to use a more benign thing, but like you have to take it as seriously as you would anything else. So the Blue Mockingbird actor, who to my knowledge was not written about before we started tracking them, they did a couple of interesting things. So they had a lot of different persistence mechanisms that they chose. They abused COM in kind of a interesting way. So anytime you launched any application on the system that had a dependency on .NET, the .NET runtime, it would kick off their persistence mechanisms again. So not a normal place that you would go looking for it. And then they staged multiple binaries, multiple DLLs to execute their stuff, so that even if you found the services that they had left behind and deleted the associated DLL, they had a second DLL that they would copy and place. So they really wanted to stay once they got there. And then most of the stuff that they're kicking off here are, they're Windows binaries, right? They're things that you would expect to see. So even if you have things like, application control, or if you're looking for any kind of new crazy executables being dropped on your machine, you wouldn't see them because they're using things that just natively exist. And so this is like I said, once they get in onto the box, usually they would attack like a specific vulnerability or a specific set of vulnerabilities in .NET web applications. So again, just vulnerable web. And once they got in, we saw them escalate privilege in a couple of different ways. If the IIS server was vulnerable, they would escalate privilege there, get the system, seen them drop Mimikatz and start grabbing credentials that way. So yeah, but really the big takeaway here is like if you don't have something that can show you this type of command history with the command line and all that good stuff, you're gonna have a really hard time finding all of the things you need to do to fix this box. Like at the end of the day, you're probably going to pave it anyway, but you don't know if you can't see this, right? Like there's too much going on the box. If you don't have the visibility to catch these types of executions, it's going to be really hard to clean up, especially when this actor just reaches out to every system on your network. Now it's a much bigger cleanup effort. And this one is not as exciting. It's more about the circumstance. Like this was a healthcare organization, and we detected Cobalt Strike beacon. So Cobalt Strike is a popular command and control, remote access, do all kinds of evil stuff. Usually it's always like some hands on keyboards type work. This one is specifically interesting because it was running, we detected it on a system that facilitated like records management and telehealth. So it's like on their telehealth application server. Like out of all the places, like you don't want Cobalt Strike anywhere in your environment, but like you definitely don't want it on the one system that has lots of sensitive data and is going to continue consuming lots of sensitive data. So Cobalt Strike, like it's, there's more activity that's a little more targeted that happens after all of this. But like one of the ways that you can see it is this start W function that's called out here. That's a very common way to find Cobalt Strike. And other ways you can do it, it's one of the harder ones. Like you can find it in a couple of different ways, like name pipes. When they move around using like specifically named name pipes. I think the Talos team over at Cisco just released a paper, The Art and Science of Detecting Cobalt Strike, and they've got a lot of good information about, the ways you can catch it at the network layer. They used to be, if you use the free version or like the cracked version of Cobalt Strike, it would actually send the EICAR string in its network traffic. So like, it's like a, hey, there's somebody evil in here. Like, they didn't pay me. If they paid me, I wouldn't do this. But yeah, so there's a couple different ways to do it. Other things I've seen that are effective to a point are it's relatively easy to fingerprint Cobalt Strike servers. You will, like, services like Shodan and stuff like that, they have lists of suspected Cobalt Strike servers. It's a more fragile type detection because anytime you're trying to map like a single netcon to evil, you're probably gonna get a lot of false positives. So, but that is another strategy that we've seen.
Awesome. So, being that you touched on telehealth, let's dive right into some of those challenges and where how the providers weren't prepared to make a drastic shift into telehealth.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what it was like for you all, but I mean, for us, like the shift between like normal world and like everything about your daily life has changed was like not quite a week. So I mean, the healthcare providers who are like we said, like they don't always move fast, and they don't always have this kind of expertise in house to say like, okay, well, we're going to do telehealth now. They don't have anything for that, so they were really kind of stuck trying to either find something from an existing vendor that they could just slam in, which has its own problems because now you've put in something that's going to impact people's like medical, they're going to give medical information from a system that may or may not be controlled, right? And you're expecting that this solution that you've bought and installed has been, developed with like a secure STLC, and that they've taken time to examine their own security architecture and they haven't cut any corners. Like, you don't have time to do a full, you don't always have time to do a full like risk assessment on this stuff. And a lot of those healthcare organizations, like, they don't do those anyway. So there's just adding a lot of complexity and potential risk into a process that used to just be done in person.
Yeah, and I think patient care there's a balance, right? Because of the pandemic, you had to focus more on present in-person patient care, and then the process breaking down for your normal patients that would come and visit. And now with the supply chain problem and doctors working remote with the BYOD devices, those pose a lot more risk just not being in the hospital that can kind of enforce their existing security control.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, so like just personally, and like, if it happens to us, it probably happens to everybody, right? Like, just recently, like, we started talking to like a new healthcare provider, and they normally, when you're a new patient, you show up in the office, like you go and you fill out all your paperwork. It's got all like your whole life there written down on the page. So got some of that paperwork, you fill it all out, and they're like, oh yeah, just send it to info@mydomain.com. You're like, I don't think you should have this in your inbox. It's a little too sensitive. And so I'm a crazy paranoid security person, so I think about that stuff all the time. I just tell them like, no, I'm not going to do this. Like, give me another alternate route. But like, if that's the default, that's what most people are going to do, right? So, but we've seen an organization that had this, like, there was a frontline, not help desk, but like a first tier support for medical stuff at a healthcare organization, and that person got their credentials phished, and then that person, like, the actor, turned around and was able to access the email, which normally, like, that's bad enough, but this person had access to a shared mailbox that had thousands of healthcare records in it. Like, email inboxes are not a good place to keep that kind of data. But when you have rapid shifts, like stuff like this, like when you have these providers and these organizations that have to make rapid changes, a lot of times those kind of things get missed, and they're just like, oh yeah, we might have to search that data again, so we just got to leave it in there, or they don't think that there's any problem with it being in there because it's secure, supposedly. So those are some of the problems that I think are going to keep cropping up because of some of the processes that were put in place or broken since COVID has kind of forced these shifts.
So it's not all doom and gloom, but there are ways we can definitely make it better, right?
Oh yeah, oh for sure. Yeah, there's definitely things we can do. Like I hate to show up and just say like everything's broken, see you later. Like if we try to give you some help. The thing is like everybody kind of wants like the silver bullet that just makes the normal IT problems go away. But really the most effective strategies and like the people who track advanced adversaries and nation states, they will tell you like some of the most effective things you can do are just do IT right. Like just have good IT hygiene. Like if you patch your web servers, you have taken like a massive amount of risk off your shoulders, because that's one less way that people have to get in, and you focus your efforts on making sure that other avenues then don't hurt you. Like some of those systems, like we talked about these medical devices where it's provided by a vendor, it's probably running like Windows XP for some reason, and like you can't ever update it because it will break the software. It's a perfect candidate for application control. It's like, okay, so you say this one thing is the only thing that can ever run on this box. It is the only thing that will ever run on this box. And now even though you can't secure it in the more traditional way, you've got a really good mitigating strategy to secure some of those devices that have traditionally been hands off, because God forbid if you push out a patch and that thing goes down, like you're getting yelled at by everybody.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I think it becomes a shared security model too, right? Some of it does depend on the healthcare and IT, but also the person providing that information to be able to ask certain questions, and if they don't feel comfortable to emphasize that or look for different ways where they can partner with the healthcare provider to ensure data safety on both ends.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely about partnership. I think like most like really good security programs understand that like the security team can't do it all, right? The IT team can't do it all. Like you're dependent on your organization and like the people who interact with you to kind of carry out that mission. So I mean, like having a good security awareness program is fantastic. Like humans are always going to be your best detective controls, because the human brain is amazing, and it can pick up on anomalies that like they might not even know. It's just like the hackles raised and they're like, I need to call somebody about this one. This one's weird. So having that like knowledge both amongst your employees and like even your patients. Like we talked about patients having telehealth sessions from computers that like are probably owned. If you just think about any of your family members that have ever called you with an IT problem, like those systems are totally owned. And so you have an opportunity, like when you're having people, like you tell people, hey, before you jump on this telehealth session, check your camera, check your microphone. Add in a step that's like, I don't know, virus scan or something. do a couple of small things, and then like the whole pipeline is better. There's less risk when everyone is kind of like paying attention to what's going on.
Yeah, and even the doctors kind of have to become more security aware, right? And when they're connecting to that user who's on a device, ensuring certain safety mechanisms, like you're saying, right? I'm your doctor now for your health, and maybe even for this session on the device that you're on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't think a lot of conversations happen where it's like, you should probably like patch your pacemaker every now and again. Like, but it's a computer. It's a computer and it runs your heart. So maybe think about it. just we gotta change the mindset.
Yeah, definitely. So with the telehealth and everybody working from home, we've been working with a lot of IT and security teams impacted by COVID, right? Especially with Red Canary and our partnership. And the outbreak, we're continuing to hear that they're struggling with a lot of significant loss of visibility and security controls due to remote everything, right? Workforces, people, administration. But we also need a few common factors that really help those teams reduce the friction in securing the remote workers. So first one is rapid deploy, right? Rapid deployment of sensors without having to stand up additional hardware, the ability to update and harden those prevention policies in minutes, even if they're off network endpoints, getting visibility to be able to investigate and triage the alerts, the way Adam was showing, regardless of where your team is and where that device is located, and then being able to audit and fix those changes to an endpoint configuration like a BitLocker, a device firewall, looking at certain patch levels. Auditing becomes a major priority in these situations. And when it comes to at a hospital, like Adam was saying, he worked at a hospital, I worked at a large hospital, vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, like we said, patch all those things. They're definite significant sorts of breaches, and nearly 20% of most breaches happen because of misconfigured workloads or virtual desktops that don't have the appropriate controls in place. So we definitely see an increase in that. And what we're going to do in the next session is just run through a brief demo of some looking at how Carbon Black is going to enable the virtual infrastructure to see some of these faults and how we can remediate them inside of your workloads, as well as looking at some preventative mechanisms inside of a virtual desktop that hospitals normally use to provide as a BYOD function or given to the doctor, so that way it's more secure, but there are certain mechanisms where that can be taken advantage of. So we'll start this. So in this scenario, the medical organization does have a vSphere environment, and they are triaging and enabling Carbon Black on those workloads. This app tier is a EMR, is part of a larger EMR application. So we did have IT go ahead and turn on Carbon Black, and they did that in mass on all of their applications. And we're just gonna show that that can be done, and each profile can have a different security mechanism tied to them, which is what we're showing here. And then we'll go ahead and look at, once that's deployed, the visibility portion becomes increasingly important. We can see our critical vulnerabilities and affected assets across all of the environment inside of the hospital. We'll dive into a virtual desktop instance that has critical vulnerabilities, and the risk score tied to that vulnerability is equal to the exploitability of that certain CVE, meaning I can pop that box and get some type of access. For security teams, they want to have that same visibility, right? IT and security usually don't talk together. So what Carbon Black is beginning to do is provide that unity between IT and security, letting security see what workloads have been deployed, what vulnerabilities those specific workloads and desktops have, and how they can mitigate risk from a security function, right? Being able to see your vulnerabilities on Windows 10 devices within your organization or within the hospital, or those BYOD devices that connect to a VDI instance. You can see all those affected assets right from one view, and then shifting over into an actual desktop. Most doctors do a tap and go. What we'll do here is run through what Adam showed as a Mimikatz, dumping passwords, being able to see that password near real time, and a lot of the times misconfiguration, the VDI admins don't log out as administrator and leave the password there on that instance, and most instances of VDI are replicas of each other. And then this is a doctor or us attempting to click on some known malware just to show the efficacy, and then we already pre-generated some alerts to show what that looks like inside of the Carbon Black console for early detection purposes and mitigation risk, showing the tactics, techniques, procedures, what user was tied to that virtual desktop, and the doctor that initiated that, or a nurse. And then really getting into some of the deeper understandings of the attack, right? Looking at the timeline, zooming out, seeing that the doctor clicked on a browser link that downloaded some malware, and then ultimately going into the real attack and looking at how that password was dumped, leveraging a known good IT tool, right? But if we really want to remediate that risk, right, having secure access to that machine, it becomes extremely important. So we can use the go live function inside of Carbon Black to search the actual desktop near real time to do remediations, to remove certain files that were planted on that machine, and better understand in real time what's going on to that inside of that box. Next thing, what we want to do is ensure that this VDI pool is not misconfigured. So we'll leverage our live query functions and look at what LSAS hygiene we can see, and we can see that after I ran that query and I'm searching for my VDI instances, I can see all of those VDI instances are susceptible to the attack that I just ran, right? Ensuring that, hey, maybe I do need to go back and repatch or fix that specific issue around dumping passwords inside of my virtual environment, because that can lead to lateral movement and things of that nature. Any comments or questions around that, Adam?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a couple of things in there that I liked. Like the one of the things I think is like underappreciated is ease of deployment. one of the things, like we've had engagements with organizations, and like just figuring out how they were going to, first of all, know what all they were going to deploy to, and then actually get it deployed was like a major hurdle. So like to be able to select all and just say like, now you have CB on it, like that's pretty great. The live response, I can't say enough good things about live response. Like we personally use it for all kinds of stuff. It's a great like kill switch, is especially when you see situations where like the first stages of a thing are happening. Like someone opened up like a Word doc with macros, and like you see it starting to unpack things. You start to see some sketchy stuff before it moves laterally. Like you have the ability to like isolate that thing. Like essentially, like you don't get to talk to anyone around you. Like it's just you and me, and like you get to do your investigation kind of like with some wiggle room, because you're not worried about that thing like rapidly moving through every other system in your organization, because it can't, doesn't know how. But we use live response for all kinds of stuff, like all kinds of security use cases. Like we use it for IT use cases sometimes. Like you have to deploy software with, you can deploy software with it. It's a really useful function to have, like essentially a shell in all your boxes. Right. If you ever need to reach out and touch them, no matter where they are. So yeah, I'm a huge live response fan.
Yeah, and that goes back to your other point, right? Secure access to those machines. This is a great way to kind of have secure access to those machines without leveraging some other tools that could be vulnerable to certain attacks.
Absolutely, it's a super useful tool.
Awesome. All right, so we're coming near the end. So a lot, you guys can get more information on our resources page. All of this content will be emailed to you. And make sure you check out the cybersecurity healthcare report. And Adam, do you have any other resources that the team should, the viewers should check out?
Yeah, so there's a good link there, redcanary.com resources. There's a full set of reports on the Blue Mockingbird actor that I spoke about. Super interesting. Like if you ever want to see kind of like the full cradle to grave investigation of like how does one event turn into like a massive investigation, and kind of like tearing apart an adversary's TTPs that like hasn't been documented before. It's a really cool walkthrough of that process. We've got some really engaging stories around that. And we have, like I mentioned before, we have some excellent ransomware stuff, like very practical. It's not like it's mostly like, just go and do these 6 things. Like just go and push these buttons, and like you're going to de-risk a lot. So it's definitely worth your time, especially if ransomware is something that keeps you up at night.
Awesome. All right, we'll jump in to see if we have any Q&A. So feel free to type your your questions in the webinar question and answer. We'll give about, maybe a minute or two to see if questions start popping in.
We will wait with bated breath.
Okay. I don't see any questions coming in. All right.
Me neither. Jackson, anything you see? We lost Jackson.
All right, so we'll just close it out with saying, please register for VMworld. There's a lot of great content around intrinsic security. I have a few sessions on protecting your workloads and some of what you saw around securing your VDI environments. So feel free to check those out. Starts next week. You can still register, all free. I want to thank Adam for attending the webinar and providing some really great information that I didn't even know about. So that's pretty awesome. So thank you, Adam.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Stay safe and healthy. And I look forward to seeing you next week at VMworld.
Bye, everybody. Thank you all.